6 men, 6 organizations. One building in the Colorado high desert built so none of them could give an order again. What landed them there wasn't what they did on the corner. It was what they kept doing after the corner was taken away. From a chief who negotiated with a foreign government by prison phone to a man who traded away his own voice just to stay alive, these reputations outlived the concrete built to hold them. Stay to the end because the last man on this list was already sentenced to die. Jeff Fort came into the world on February 20th, 1947 in Aberdeen, Mississippi, and landed on Chicago's South Side at 8 years old. He was one of 10 children. He got through the 9th grade at Hyde Park High School and never went back. The state sent him to a reform school in St. Charles. That is where the rest of it started. Inside, he met a boy called Bull Hairston. In 1959, the two of them built a crew and named it after the street Fort came up on, the Blackstone Rangers. Within 10 years, the name covered most of Woodlawn. Fort was pulling federal anti-poverty money into an organization that had already outgrown the neighborhood. The name changes tracked the ambition. He came home in 1976, went to Milwaukee, and joined the Moorish Science Temple. Back in Chicago by 1978, he replaced the 21 generals running the Stones with 5 men he trusted. Then he renamed everything El Rukayn, Arabic for the pillar, and took the name Abdul Malik Kaaba for himself. Investigators believe the conversion was tactical. Surveillance rules ran tighter on churches than on street gangs. A drug trafficking conviction in 1983 sent him to a federal prison in Bastrop, Texas, and 13 years should have ended his reach. It was a collect call, the most ordinary sound in any American prison, and he made them almost daily. Over those lines, he directed El Rukayn members to meet with Libyan officials. Prosecutors said the organization offered to carry out attacks inside the United States in exchange for $2.5 million in weapons. It was the first time American citizens were charged with plotting domestic terrorism for a foreign government. A jury convicted him in 1987, and he got 80 years. A second jury convicted him the next year of ordering a rival's murder back in 1981. That one stacked 75 more years on top. 168 years total. The Bureau of Prisons moved him to Florence in 2006, and he has been under a no human contact order since the day he walked in. A judge denied his compassionate release in 2023, and the ruling said a willingness to kill indiscriminately and for profit placed him among the most dangerous criminals the court had seen. Around October 19, 2025, Fort blacked out in his cell and struck his head on the concrete floor. He came out of extensive surgery at 79 years old. His advocates are still fighting to get him moved to a geriatric facility, and so far, nothing has moved. Omar Portee came up on 183rd Street and Davison Avenue in the West Bronx, raised by his grandmother. He ran with a crew called the 1-8 Trade Gangsters long before anyone said the name O.G. Mac with weight behind it. He was arrested for robbery at age 17. He served that stretch and came home in 1990, and by 1993 he was sitting in the George Machen Detention Center on Rikers Island facing an attempted murder charge. Rikers is where all of it actually happened. The jail was dominated by Latino gangs. Black inmates were outnumbered, and men were getting hurt on a schedule. Nothing about that dormitory suggested anything was being founded inside it. Portee's answer was to fold every independent black crew in the building into a single blood car and run them as one body. That was 1993 in the C 73 section. United Blood Nation. The first set he stood up was the 9 Trade Gangsters. Where the name O.G. Mac came from has never been settled in any court record, and the men who could say it are not talking. What is documented is the machinery he left behind. The organization runs on 31 written rules that members call the 31, laid down by the founders and enforced everywhere the gang went. Every member owes dues, $31 a month or $93. A percentage of everything collected gets routed upward to leadership sitting in cells back in New York. Portee did not build a crew. He built a payroll that runs in the wrong direction, and it has outlasted him by 3 decades. Within 10 years, the UBN had spilled out of Rikers into the Bronx and down the eastern seaboard. It moved into narcotics, robbery, extortion, and prostitution rings, and federal prosecutors came to describe it as one of the most violent gangs in the country. The case closed on him in 2002. Racketeering, murder, conspiracy, credit card fraud, drug trafficking. In April 2003, a judge handed him 50 years. Then something unusual happened. In 2021, the Bureau moved him out of the supermax and into the step-down program next door. That program is the closest thing ADX offers to a way out. By January 2022, he was back inside. His release date is May 23, 2044, when he will be 75. Luis Felipe wasn't just another Mariel refugee trying to disappear into New York. He was born in Havana on May 6, 1962, and came over on the boat lift in 1980. 6 years later, he was in Collins Correctional Facility upstate serving 9 years for manslaughter. That is where he sat down and wrote a charter. He called it the Bloodline, the New York body of the Latin kings, and the men who signed onto it called him King Blood. It spread through the state prison system first, then out onto the street through everybody who paroled home. He ran the whole thing on paper. Letters went out through the mailroom, stamped and processed like everybody else's. Inside them were promotions, demotions, rulings, and names. The names were the problem. Felipe used those letters to order the killing of members he had decided were disloyal. Investigators eventually recovered more than 60 of them. 2 of the men who died were William Cartagena and Victor Hirschman. A third target was knifed and survived. In November 1996, a jury convicted him on 18 counts, including 3 murders, 3 attempted murders, and conspiracy. What happened at sentencing had almost no precedent in the federal system. Judge John S. Martin Jr. gave him life plus 45 years and then kept going. Felipe would serve it in solitary confinement. No letters out, no visitors except attorneys and immediate family, and he has no immediate family. Martin also refused to hand those conditions to the Bureau of Prisons, keeping authority over them himself so that nobody could quietly loosen them later. He told Felipe he did not believe in capital punishment and that this was the case that would have changed his mind. Felipe arrived at Florence into 80 square feet of nearly soundproof concrete. He ate there. He showered there. The television bolted to the wall carried religious programming and self-improvement courses and nothing else. Then, in 1999, a federal judge ruled he could join the exercise hour. Waiting out there were Ted Kaczynski, Ramsey Youssef, and Timothy McVeigh. After years of fighting for contact with another human being, Felipe won, and then turned it down. He said he wanted nothing to do with those bombers. He went back into his cell and stayed there. The federal indictment listed Pedro Gutierrez under 3 names: Magoo, Light, and Inferno. None of the paperwork explains where a single one of them came from. What the paperwork does explain is rank. Gutierrez held the title of Godfather of the 9 Trey Gangsters, the same set Omar Portee stood up in a Rikers dormitory in 1993. On top of that, he sat as chairman over the entire United Blood Nation. 25 years after the founding, the organization was still being run out of cells. The only thing that had changed was the size of the map. 9 Trey members called themselves Billies, and they carried the dues structure into every state they touched. The money moves in amounts small enough that no bank and no landlord would ever look twice. $31, $93, multiplied across a network and pushed up the chain toward men who cannot leave a room. That is the part investigators kept running into. He had no phone, no freedom, and no visible income. He still had a war chest and a workforce. The cash came up through narcotics trafficking, robberies, wire fraud, and bank fraud committed by members who would never meet him. According to prosecutors, Gutierrez used that structure to order a gang war in North Carolina from behind bars. A high-ranking member named Cynthia Gilmore acted as his conduit to the field. She relayed instructions from a man most of the people following them had never seen, and she was sentenced to 19 years for it. The case that finally came for them ran through the Western District of North Carolina, and it did not stop at the top. On September 4, 2018, Chief Judge Frank Whitney sentenced Gutierrez to 20 years for racketeering conspiracy and handed the same 20 to James Baxton, who carried the rank of worldwide high. By the time the last of it was finished, 67 defendants had pleaded guilty or been convicted. Gutierrez went to Florence with a release date of October 16, 2034. The set outlived the takedown the same way it outlived its founder. 9 Trey is still collecting, and the dues still travel in the same direction, toward whichever man is locked in the deepest room available. Peter Rollock was 25 years old when he agreed to spend the rest of his life alone. Soundview in the Bronx produced him in the late 1980s. The set he built there was called Sex, Money, Murder, and it eventually folded under the same blood umbrella that had been assembled on Rikers. It moved cocaine and crack from New York down into North Carolina in cars fitted with hidden compartments for product, cash, and firearms. He was wealthy before he was 20. On the block they called him Pistol Pete, a name street accounts tied to how quickly and how personally he was willing to shoot. A traffic stop in 1994 turned up drugs and weapons and grew into a federal narcotics case. That should have been the end of his exposure. Instead, while he sat in jail waiting on it, the orders kept leaving the building. In 1995, Carlton Hines was killed over a debt. Carlos Mestre, a witness to that killing, was killed after him. In 1997, 2 more men who prosecutors believed were preparing to cooperate, David Mullins and Ephraim Solar, were executed. The orders left the jail folded inside ordinary pieces of mail. Investigators intercepted them and he was charged in 7 killings, and the government wanted him dead for it. The deal he took in November 2000 removed the death penalty and replaced it with something no defendant had volunteered for before: mandatory life, plus his own signed agreement to indefinite solitary confinement and a bar on communicating with almost anyone outside. He took it, and he arrived at Florence before the year was out. The plea built in a review of his isolation after 18 months, which came due in 2002. The Bureau declined, and it has declined every time since. By 2012, he had logged nearly 12 unbroken years in that cell with a spotless disciplinary record. He had taken hundreds of hours of coursework through the television bolted to his wall, and he had written a novel called Trigger that his family published for him. His attorneys argued that record had to count for something eventually. Prosecutors argued the opposite, that a man whose suggestions still get carried out on sight is precisely the man who can never be allowed to make one. Both sides were describing the same prisoner. Neither of them was wrong. Savage was not a name he picked up on a corner. It was on his birth certificate. Kaboni Savage was born on January 1st, 1975, and boxed professionally before any of the rest of it. By his late 20s, he ran a drug organization out of North Philadelphia that prosecutors would tie to 12 killings. In May 2004, he was indicted on cocaine, money laundering, and firearms charges. He went into the federal detention center in Philadelphia to wait for trial. A former associate named Eugene Coleman had agreed to cooperate against him. Coleman was locked in the same building. According to Coleman's testimony, Savage was housed on a different floor and still got messages to him, passing threats through the plumbing between cells. On the evening of October 8, 2004, Savage called an enforcer named Lamont Lewis and told him he needed a favor. He said his sister would explain the rest. Kidada Savage laid out the plan and drove Lewis to North 6th Street to point out the house. Everyone inside it was asleep. In the pre-dawn hours of October 9th, Lewis and Robert Merritt filled 2 gas cans on the way over. Lewis forced entry and fired warning shots up the stairs to keep the people inside from getting out. Merritt threw in a gas can with a lit cloth fuse, then threw a second. When the fire department got the flames down, they recovered 6 bodies. Coleman's 54-year-old mother, his 15-month-old son, 4 other relatives, including a 10-year-old girl and 2 boys aged 12 and 15. Lewis sat blocks away and watched it burn, and he testified that he did not learn until hours later there had been children in the house. It took 9 more years to finish the case. Prosecutors played recordings of Savage in custody, joking about the killings. On May 13, 2013, the jury came back guilty on all 17 counts. He became the first defendant in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania ever sentenced to death in federal court. He went to Florence to wait. He waited 11 years. On December 23, 2024, the sentence was commuted to life without parole, part of a mass clemency covering 37 men on federal death row. Nothing else about his situation changed. He is in the same building, under the same conditions, serving a term that ends when he does. The Justice Department has since started moving the other commuted men into that facility. 10 had arrived as of the last public count, with all 37 expected to follow.